Day. Hopefully you're doing great. It's a beautiful morning here, and I hope it is where you are too. Today we're going to work with applique, and I'm excited about it. I do love hand applique, so I'm excited to get started on the flowers because, as you can see behind me, I have the 2 blocks from last week completed and the red panels sewn onto those 2 blocks. So that gives us our palette to work with the flowers. We're going to talk through some of that stuff today as we get going. It's been a busy time around my house, at least, where my husband has retired and we're getting ready to move, and we're going to be moving up to the Livermore area. We had lived there some years ago and loved the area, and there's also 2 grandchildren there that are kind of drawing us to that spot again. So we are in the process of moving, so you'll see things disappear off walls and things behind me as the packing gets underway and we get going here. So good morning again to everyone that's just coming in. Welcome. And the very first thing that I'd like to talk about today is that there's want to clear up a section of the pattern. So I'm going to drop the camera so that you can see what I'm referring to. On the sections, I'm working through these sections. It seems like a very clear and organized way to go about doing that. So I am going to be working through here, and it's not until section 6 that this discrepancy comes up, and where it talks about the dies. It says vase dies, and it gives the number 55088. That is referring to the little flower that's on top, that you're going to put on top of the vase. It's not referring to the die cutter as the vase. This vase is something we're going to be tracing and cutting out separately from any die. So if you have a die cutter, what that's referring to is the flower petals that are on decoration on the vase and not the vase itself. So with that out of the way, if some of you are wanting to do all the die cuts at the same time, but as we go along, you may decide you want to change things up a little bit. So when we go back to section 1, we have the we've already done the first 2 blocks, sewn the red panel on, and we're going to be working on these flowers today. And so these flowers are what we're going to applique, and as you can see, there are pieces and parts that fall down below. When we get to a little bit further on and we've done some applique stuff, we're not going to attach everything to this first block. Things are going to carry over to the next one so that the flowers all and the pots and everything work well together with that. So we're at this point where the dies are there. If you have those and you're going to do machine applique, then those are the die cut numbers for those, and all of those are fine. Today we're going to work on this stuff right here, which is the applique, and I'm going to work with you with the papers and things for the machine applique, the double-sided fusibles, and also my favorite way of doing applique. Now, I also want to share with you that as we work through this pattern, although today you're going to see the applique that I appreciate the most, I'm going to share with you other forms and methods of applique, and I actually use different methods for different pieces because I think it works better for certain shapes, or when we have, points and all of that type of thing. And the tools that I use from time to time, and those that I probably don't, because there are so many different ways that people can tackle these. And so I'm going to show you what I know, and but also other than today, I'm using the starch method today because it really still is my favorite. But I also use other forms of hand applique at different times, because for me it makes the most sense for that particular pattern or applique piece. All right, and so I'll be working my way through all of this. I would suggest that if you have not read this in your pattern, to go ahead and read through. She has some good information about the piece blocks as well as the applique blocks, and I would encourage you to read through all of that at some point if you have not done that already. All right, then I want to share with you two different the first one is this Select Apliquick, and this is wonderful for, I really appreciate this for what it can do for machine applique for me. I will admit to you that I do not do machine applique very often. I really enjoy hand applique, so it's a rare day when I do machine applique. But when I do, I like the Apliquick, and I will even use it with my hand applique from time to time, and I will show you later in the weeks to come how I do that. But this Apliquick is a double-sided, and the sheets have the glue on the one side. I don't know that you can see the shiny on one side, and then where you would draw your pattern on this particular side of the Apliquick. So that's one of the products that I use. Then this other one, Print and Piece Fuse Light. This is also really pretty wonderful as well. And this works that you can put it right through your printer. And so these patterns that are on here, if you had them on a piece, and you could just put them right through, cut them out, and on the one side, you're going to see again, I don't know if the camera really shows it, but there is a glue side and there is the paper side. And this is really not paper, it's a fiber. And so it's a very different kind of feel to it, and I love it. The other reason I really like that, I've used it here to get started for today's work, and this is the Fuse and Light. And even though it washes away mostly, and you can even get rid of it easily with water along your sewing lines and things like that, I like that little bit of extra in there. It gives a little bit of a 3D effect when you're appliquing, and so the applique doesn't come out looking so flat like it can from time to time. So I like that little bit of extra in there. I also use Misty Fuse for my machine applique from periodically when I am cutting pieces that are freehand, when I need to get directly to the edges, I will fuse the back side of fabric and cut out stems and different things, and I want a very light touch to my fabric, then I'll use Misty Fuse. But otherwise, I do like the papers. Now on our section for today, in green, those are the die cut numbers. But if you do not have a die cutter, then these are the petals and stuff that you're going to need to trace for the pattern. And I have traced these onto freezer paper. I take my freezer paper and I usually have 2 sheets of the freezer paper, and I draw the pattern on one, uh, and then I layer. If I've drawn on this one, I layer it on top of the other one and iron them down so I have a little bit thicker pattern to it. And sometimes, depending on the freezer paper, I'll even go 3 layers, depending on that. So then these leaves, if you will note in on your pattern, it says one should be mirror imaged, and so you're going to need to trace them, one this direction and one as a mirror image. And how I do that is I simply turn the paper over and I can see it. I have a flat light box that I like to use when I'm doing and that way these patterns show up really well. If I am drawing them, you know, however, I can see really well through this little paper thin light box that I have. And so I will draw one on this side. Both of these talk about mirror image, and then I'll simply turn it over and I'll get my mirror image from the back side. And then I have what I need. For that, for these petals where I need 7 and 6 of each one on those, I will create a freezer paper template, and then I can reuse this over and over again, and I don't have to draw 6 or 7 of them at the same time. I have a tendency to be one of those people that needs to do things quickly, and so I try to find the easiest, quickest way that I can get something accomplished and done. And now I want to talk about this one. This one is on the fold, and so you're going to have your fabric folded over. This will be on the fold line, and you will trace then this pattern onto your fabric and have a full piece for the vase on section number 1. We have the bird. And I want to talk a little bit about the bird. I am not going to be doing anything with the bird this week. There's a second bird on the quilt further along, and I want to give a couple of different ideas and thoughts on creating the bird. If you are doing machine applique and it's just one cut around and you can do that, go for it. Make sure that you can make that happen today if you want to go ahead and do that. But I have some other ideas and thoughts on the bird, so I'm going to put the bird off from section 1 for a little while. All right, so let's get started with what we're going to be working on today. I have chosen my fabrics. I am using this green from the kit for the darker leaves, this one for the lighter ones. I chose this purple for the purple flower and the orange flower and the vase. So this is what these are the fabrics that I'm going to be working with on this applique part of this. And so let's take a look. When I do my starch method applique, I have cut out of freezer paper it says cut 6 leaves for the purple flower, and I label everything before I cut it out, because when I'm working and I have everything all around me, sometimes it's hard to remember which leaf goes where and which one is to which flower and that type of thing. So I label everything so that I know exactly what's coming up with that. So I have cut it exactly on the line. If you were to take any one of these pieces that I've cut, and I do want to talk just a little bit about the cutting. I use a paper scissors. I'm just going to cut this little piece off. So when I'm cutting, I really want my edges to be smooth. I have used, a pencil, a graphite pencil, and these are actually with the Apliquick lady. And so I use those because they draw really well, and a graphite pencil works a little bit better than a number two. It shows up better, and it will go over the rough front side, back side. It really does a good job of, and you can see just on screen how much darker this has become. Um, just by going over it a second time. So as I'm cutting, there's a sweet spot in the scissors. And I don't know, sometimes people know about that, other times they don't. And so I keep my cutting in that sweet spot, which is about right there in a scissors. And if you go all the way down, you get those sharp points as you're turning, and we don't want those in our applique because I want a really smooth applique. So I work my way and I keep moving, and actually in the sweet spot of a scissors, the scissors almost cuts itself, the pattern that you're working on. And these leaves have some natural little stops and starts and little bumps along the way, which is wonderful. It gives it that really organic look. And so as I'm cutting, I keep my scissors in that sweet spot, and it gives me a really smooth cut, which is exactly what I want at this point in time around that edge. So I've cut out that piece and it's ready to be fused onto my stem fabric. But right now I have used my freezer paper. I have ironed it to my fabric, so it's stuck there for the moment. And with my starch, and I want to talk a little bit about starch. I get kind of picky. I like the Faultless Premium Starch with the gold cap, and I'm using the cap. I put some of my starch. I sprayed it in the bottom for today. That's why the cap isn't on here. The reason I like this is if I don't get to my applique right away, this does not flake or chip off like many of the starches do. And it also dries a little quicker, and I like the feel of it because you don't even, it does the job. It just doesn't feel like there's anything in your fabric. And so I simply take, and I do not touch the paper. I come around the edges, and I can do the whole thing at once. And what the starch does is it migrates to the edge of my fabric, and you can already see that it's doing that. I think you can see that on camera. And then I like holding that. I use these Apliquick tools for a lot of different things. I've actually found them to be useful for many more things than just applique. But holding that down, I can then use my iron to move it around, or I simply like to use my fingers. And I get asked this question a ton of times, is don't you ever burn yourself? And the answer is I did once, and that was the last time. But the other thing that you could do is you could use this. It takes a little bit of time to learn how to use this little gadget, or at least it did for me. When I have extra gadgets, but I can go pretty fast with just my finger as well. And I am only hitting the edge of my pattern because I really don't want to go all the way up. If I started and pressed all the way to the top, so then I get sometimes points here, and I really want that to be really very, very smooth across the top. And I will feel along there, and if I feel any bumps or little pokey outy things, I go back and change them immediately. for that. So now I want to talk a little bit about the points on a leaf. For me, the point comes in right here, and I want that to stay flat all the way over there so that when I pull this up and over, it fits right in to that, whoops, excuse me, to that edge piece. And then I can start to move that. And hand fatigue, that kind of stuff, it can happen depending on how you know, how you deal with it. But the iron is hot, the edge is there. I don't feel that I have to press down really hard to get it to stick. So I'm good with it. So now I have pressed the edge all the way around of my leaf, and it's smooth all the way. I've got this perfect little leaf that I can put on. So now I take and I just dry all the starch into that, get it nice and flat and crisp. And what's good about this with the freezer paper and the starch method is that I open this up and I can take out my pattern. Sometimes I just hit it again. It makes me feel better. I don't think I need to do it. And I have this leaf ready and set to go. So for my applique, my hand applique, or actually machine applique as well, if you like the look of the faux hand applique, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So then I can use the same pattern and make the other 5 leaves. And this is the one that I did on the light print and piece fuse light paper. And the other method that I will often use is the one where you use the glue stick. There is a time and a place for this. Funky little curves is where I like to use it the most. And this is where these tools come in really handy. And this is so thin and light that coming in, it just lays over beautifully. And the other thing that I very much like about the tools and things, when I have a little bit of curve, and I did, so I really wanted it smooth, so I left it like that. I snipped into that so it would lay nice and flat, is that this paper now is going to stay in here. And that's fine if I only have 1 or 2 pieces that I don't have to draw multiple of these to cut out, then I leave it in there, and I like a little bit more fullness on parts of my applique piece. And then I don't go very far with the glue at a time because the glue does dry. Usually I work pretty fast, as you can see. And I'm just getting the edge. Again, the same thing that I talked about with the iron. I'm just moving this right at the edge, and I'm making sure that that lays down nice, flat, and smooth. And I kind of lay that over, and I kind of push it in so that when you're going over a curve like I am right here, I get a little bit more ruffle up here, and that's perfectly fine. And that's why I kind of do that little bit of a push at that edge, and I can get that to be, again, very nice and flat. And when you're up here at the points and we're going around, well, it's at a point, what's nice too is I take the glue out into the fabric just a tiny bit, and I, this fork tongue edge, when you're holding it like this, it doesn't move as easily, but lift it up on one side and you can move this around wherever you need to move it to, which is really very nice to have that in place. So let's get up here to the corner. With the glue, it's kind of nice because now when I get that point, I can glue that piece right in there, so it's going to flip over to the other side very nicely. And I take my glue right up into the back side of the fabric there as I'm running this along. And when I turn this fabric at the corner over with the glue, I'm just going to keep that moving. All right. I want to make sure that all of that is there. Now with this point, you can see that I have this little overhang. If I drop just a smidge of glue right there on that point, I can fold that back on itself, and sometimes I will use my acorn glue or Roxanne's glue for that point. The glue just, I know that I can get it in there. And then I have this lovely point that's done, completed, and in there, and so I don't have to mess with my needle. I can just go up and go back right around, and I have that really nice point the same way that I did on this one. So that is those are the two ways that I tackle hand applique, or the what I call faux machine applique, because with this one, with this paper in here, it gives a good stabilizer, and you can now use your sewing machine and invisible thread or the same color of thread and do your blanket stitch, which I don't really do. If I want it to look like hand applique, I will use my zigzag stitch and go down to a very short and low width zigzag and just hit the edge of that, and it looks almost like invisible hand applique. So that's another way that you can do this if you don't want to do the handwork, but you want the look of hand applique, is that it can be sewed down by shortening your width and length of your stitch and using invisible thread, or a thread that matches exactly the fabric that you're sewing on. So that is that first part. Now with the applique here on the orange flower, I would put this onto the back side of my fabric, and I would press that down, and you probably, and I gotta make sure that I have it on the right side, and I do. So I would press that to the back side of the fabric, and then once that has been pressed to the back side of your fabric, you simply cut it out on the lines. And I usually leave a little bit of paper around the outside edges when I cut them out. I rough cut this, put it on the back, and then I cut it out exactly on the line. And I'm going to just quickly remove that while I still can, and we'll just do that. So if I'm going to do this for real, so this would be rough cut, pressed to the back of the fabric, and then I would absolutely cut it out on the line, and then it can be, then when you turn it over, it can be fused. Actually, you would use the double-sided fusible for the applique so that you can fuse it down, because this one has fusible on both sides. So you would draw it on the paper side of your pattern. You would fuse it down, and then when you flip it over, you could fuse it to your fabric piece, and you have your double-sided fusible for that. So I'm not going to fuse either one of these to anything because that's going to be part of my hand applique. Now, if you want to understand a little bit more about the machine applique with this pattern, if that's how you're going to do that with your die cuts, my understanding with the dies is that you fuse the fabric to the back side of your fabric, your fusible, and once you do that, you run it through the die machine, and then you can fuse it to your fabric again. That you can fuse it to the fabric, and then you run it through the die, and then you have your pattern for your die cut, and that can be fused then onto your quilt. So that makes it really easy to do, because all you're doing is taking a sheet of your double-sided fusible, and with your pattern, you don't even have to have a pattern, just put your double-sided fusible onto your fabric, and then run it through the die machine, and the die machine cuts it, and then you're ready to go, and all you need to do is fuse it to your quilt top, and which makes it really easy. So I can see why many of you really enjoy those die cuts, because that certainly would be quick and fast. So what we're going to try to accomplish this week is to get all of the flowers. Let me grab my sheet here. We want to get all of the flowers completed. So you would create your piece here, your flower stems or flower petals up here. You would get your leaves completed and put on. This is the section that we have made, and as you can see, some of the flowers are completely cut off on here. So my suggestion for you, which I think is going to help make this much easier, is we are going to put our 3 flowers and their stems onto the pattern itself. We're going to measure up where the top of the vase is going to go and get our flowers on, but we will not put the vase on at this point. We're going to do that in the next section. So leave off this. So if you're hand appliquing, you can go ahead and hand applique stems and leaves. You can, and the petals. I'm not going to be doing the bird at this time, as I've already told you. I'm going to do that later on. Because I want to give you several different methods and ways that we can tackle this bird. But again, if you are doing machine applique and you're simply cutting around the pieces and fusing them on, go for it if you want to do that now or wait till later. But let's leave the vase off for now so that we can applique it to the top of our next section piece and get that exactly where we want it to go. So that should give you enough to keep you a little bit busy this week with that. I hope that these worked out really well for you and that your applique method works for you. I like the starch. The glue works really great. We've got, freezer paper method that I showed you today, or also the glue method using the using the Print and Piece Fuse Light from Quilter Select. This is such a great product for a lot of different reasons, and of course make sure that you read the instructions on the back for care of it and how it works, and washing it, and you'll understand a little bit better on that if you're using that particular paper for this project. So this week we got some flowers to plant and create and grow, and a vase to make, but not applique it down yet in any way. And if you need help with machine applique, sewing it down, or understanding that process, I'm going to encourage you to go back to the Alex Anderson, the quilt that she's been working on lately. She has just done a couple of different shows, I think over the last couple of weeks. She has done a couple of shows on machine applique her way, and I think some other possibilities. And of course, on the quilt show in the search engine, put in machine applique, and you're going to get a variety of people who have done different forms of machine applique. It's not my forte, it's not the applique that I'm going to be doing on this, but I also want to be helpful to you with the machine applique. If you have questions, if there's anything that you didn't understand, please go to the forum for those who can get in and work on that. I know they're working really hard to make sure everything is up on the forum, or you can put it in the questions in the chat box here. And I know that usually Kristen and John and I look at those, and we'll get your questions answered in either in the chat box and definitely on the forum. And if you post your pictures, I'd love to see the colors and the choices that you've made in choosing for both your blocks as well as your flowers. And I'm going to be spending this week doing some applique and packing a few boxes for this move that we're going to be making. Feels like a big chore, a big project right now, and it is. But we'll keep working on all the way through. And so this week for me, it's packing a few boxes and doing a little bit of applique. You have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week, right before the 4th of July, which ought to be a fun celebration. So enjoy, and talk to you next week. Bye.